Welcome to Margin for Mission, the CRI Cape and Krause podcast, where two friends, Ken and Chris, bring you real talk about creating space for what matters most. Because when your organization has financial and operational margin, you can focus on your mission with confidence.
We're professionals who've spent years helping churches, higher education institutions, and other mission-focused nonprofit organizations manage their accounting, tax, compliance, and other challenges. We understand the complexities you face, and we're here to make it simpler.
In each episode, we'll dive into practical insights on leadership, operations, and the everyday challenges of running a nonprofit without the jargon.
And we'll talk about life, too. Family, faith, quite a bit of football, and finding balance in a world that rarely slows down.
So whether you're managing budgets, leading teams, or just trying to keep your mission moving forward, you're in the right place.
This is Margin for Mission. Let's get started.
Well, welcome back to another podcast episode of Margin for Mission. This is Ken here again. I know my colleague and friend Chris Purnell is not able to attend right now. As you can tell, we had a quick break this past week because I had some travel. My colleague Chris had some travel as well. But what's also great, though, is that we had some amazing content this past week. So this time is a little bit of a special kind of episode. We're actually going to be calling out an episode of a webinar that I was able to do where I got to interview two great folks. The first person was William Vanderbloemen. He is the founder of Vanderbloemen, which is an executive search agency towards ministries and churches. And also got to interview Neal, who is the chief financial officer for the Church of God. It's one of those things that was very interesting that we got to have this type of conversation because the episode was talking about finding the right CFO for your church. And so for myself, it was a very interesting topic just because of the fact that you get to have the conversation from three different perspectives. Myself, who does a lot of these outsourced CFO, fractional controller, strategic advisory services, to then also talking to a person that is doing it in-house for a ministry and gets to see how that had worked out. And then lastly, of course, a person who is searching for those types of folks. And so that's where part of it has been a really fun one. And we thought, hey, for those that weren't listening at that webinar, we thought it'd be great for you all to be able to hear that one too. And I know we'll get right back to some other episodes. I hope you enjoy this too as well. Thanks again.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is such a wonderful time here with you all, and I am so grateful that you all are willing to join me and my fellow friend here, Jen, as well, as we talk through an important topic that I think really impacts a lot of faith-based organizations, a lot of churches, and what better than to have someone that also sees it from another perspective too as well. And so for today, with the webinar that we're going to be talking about, it is on unlocking potential and strategies for finding your church's ideal CFO. You know, especially for a lot of churches now, there's a lot of things that we have to think about when it comes to even just how things operate from a day-to-day basis. And it's something that's so important that you have to have the right folks. And this is where part of it is, you know, there may be a chance that because how many churches there are across the country, some may not have a CFO, but some may be reaching that point. And there's a lot of times that we feel like it's so important for us just to even share about how that could even look like. And so as we continue here, I know even for those that are on here, they might be getting continuing education. And so there are some things here about making sure that you fill out any of the polls and submit that, as well as making sure that you stay on here. My hope, though, is that this is going to be a great interactive session as well with my friend here, Jen. And so please just be mindful of that, that if you are trying to get that, to just be aware when we do up those polling questions, but we definitely want this to be more of a type of dialogue. And so really, when it comes to even just the program itself, the hope here is to discover how the right financial leader can elevate your church's mission, stewardship, and long-term stability. We've seen it very often, how quickly leadership, especially in those types of positions, can be impacted both positively and negatively if the right folks are in place or if they are not. The hope here is that you also learn some practical strategies for identifying, attracting, and evaluating candidates who can bring both expertise and spiritual insights to the role. Because we know that especially when it comes to this particular area, it is a comprehensive approach. It's not just finding a person that's skilled from a technical side, but there are other attributes too as well. And so this is where part of it is learning objectives, right? We're going to learn about identifying the essential financial, operational, leadership competencies required. We'll apply some proven sourcing and recruitment strategies to attract qualified financial leaders. It is something that I have also done that too when it came to helping us find some great candidates for our clients. But then this were part of it is essentially, I know, being recruited ourselves. I think Jen could probably share a little bit about that too as well. We're going to evaluate candidates effectively by understanding how to assess both technical expertise and alignment with ministry, culture, and values. Then also how to strengthen your church's leadership selection process with tools and frameworks and ensure confidence and clarity when choosing a CFO. So I know we'll talk about a little bit about presenters. I guess just since my name shows that it's not saying that I'm the first and foremost here, but I am grateful to be the host on this piece. I am Ken. I have the honor of serving as the firm's church and denomination leader here at Cape and Krause. And so my role here encompasses not just consulting, where most of mine is, but also making sure that we can serve across all of our various service lines in a way that is consistent and as high in terms of what our service expertise is. And so for me, I'm actually, I would say I am a national in terms of my role, but I definitely get to enjoy working on a one-on-one basis with a lot of our clients too as well. Jen, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Jennifer Neal, and everyone calls me Jen. I am the CFO for Church of God Ministries, which is kind of like a denominational headquarters, but the Church of God calls that a movement. We have approximately 5,000 churches abroad, 2,000 churches in the United States and Canada, and then we're talking about 6,000 ministers across the movement. So there's quite a lot of people that I get to be interacting with, and we work for the General Assembly of the Church of God. I came from industry, if you can believe that. In my early career, I was the controller and worked for Delta Faucet, and then I took Masco Support Services. Masco is the owner of Delta Faucet, so we took a division, and I was the controller there, and we sold that division. So I have lots of industry experience. I worked for Stanley Black and Decker, and I worked for a couple of other chemical companies. And then you'll get to hear some of my little anecdotes of coming out of industry and into ministry. Was not my goal when I was young, but the Lord just led me into ministry, and to really utilize the skills and expertise and education that I had to further the mission and ministry of the gospel, which is just has been very fulfilling to me. So I feel like there are others of us out there that would never think that they want to be in ministry as a CFO for a church or large organization, but they could very well be the exact right fit and right person for you. So it gives you a little bit about me.
Thank you, Jen. And then also love to introduce as well another friend of ours as well for the firm, William Vanderbloemen. William is the CEO and founder of Vanderbloemen. But William, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself to the listeners as well in terms of what your role is, a little bit of your story, because I think it's so important just to even see, especially where we all came along and how we're here today in this conversation.
Well, don't ask a recovering preacher that kind of question. Be here a long time. Thanks, Ken. Really, really grateful to be with you guys and for what you do. You've done excellent work for so long. And for those of you wondering, Ken and I aren't longtime friends. We're not golf buddies. We played one time for 9 holes, but he beat me soundly. And I served as a pastor for about 15 years, mostly senior pastor. Last church I served was First Presbyterian, which is a fairly large church. Went into the corporate world. And while I was working at a large corporation, the CEO, very large corporation, the CEO said, time to retire and find a new CEO. And they hired this thing called a search firm. And 90 days later, they had a new CEO. And I couldn't believe it. I was on the HR team at the time doing kind of a management rotation thing, and got to watch that process and thought the church needs something like this. And so I'd just gotten married, Adrian and I just blended our families. We had a house we couldn't afford, 6 kids, and I came home and said, "Baby, I think I'm supposed to quit my job and start something new for churches." And she looked at me and said, "Well, that's because churches love new ideas, right?" And so she's really who you ought to have on the webinar. She's the smarter one of the two. Horrible taste in men, but other than that, pretty cool lady. Um, and that was the fall up to '08, which if you're in finance, you remember that was not a great time to quit your job and start something new for churches. But God was kind, and here we are almost 18 years later now, and have gotten to work all over the world with churches, helping them find their pastor, um, and pretty much anyone who reports directly to the pastor, which would be a CFO or a controller or whoever the finance, person is in that role. We worked all over the world, predominantly English speaking. We've completed over 4,000 searches now, which is
Wow.
I can't believe that. But we're learning every day, and the world's changing faster than ever. So it's an exciting time to be serving churches, and glad to be here with you.
Absolutely, William. And I guess in full candor, I don't just owe William a sleeve of golf balls. I think I owe him a whole box just after the 9 holes. And so it was a wonderful time just even to catch up with William. But this is where part of it is just, especially you start thinking about even this time we have together. What's great about this is you're going to be able to hear it from someone like myself, where I do some of the fractional CFO strategic advisory work from a firm perspective. Jen is seeing this from an in-house perspective as an in-house CFO. And then William is coming in from someone that is helping a lot of our organizations find that ideal CFO or executive leader as well. And so that's where part of it is we want to have this as a holistic approach too as well. And so especially when we start talking about the first one we're going to talk about, of course, is the key CFO competencies. Some of the things that especially you can tell we serve thousands of different clients. And so part of that means that we end up seeing probably a baseline understanding across the board of what are some ideal traits that we see for those CFOs. Jen sees that, of course, from someone that was coming in from an in-house side. And then William also sees it from what is the ideal side to match it to a client of his too as well. And so I'll start off with that first one, right? Strategies for identifying your ideal CFO. I'm guessing, in this question, I'd love to get your thoughts first here on this, William, based on your experience, especially with the thousands of different types that you've done for searches. What do you feel like distinguishes a great church CFO or executive leader from a technically strong accountant who may not be the right fit for ministry leadership?
That's such a good question, Ken. I mean, you could spend a whole hour on that question.
Yeah.
It is not experience working with numbers. That's not what distinguishes a great candidate. Having been a pastor, I have committed this sin. Okay, can we do a little confession? Okay. As a senior pastor, First Pres Houston, it's where Sam Houston was baptized, or Sam Houston went to church. I think when he was baptized, all the fish downstream drowned and died. But he all all that's to say, lots of corporate leadership in our church, probably
Sure.
more than any church in the city, and we're the third largest city in the country. I was way too enamored with professional degrees and corporate leadership. Way too enamored. I thought if I had some dude who'd started a company and run it and did well and sold it, I should hire him as my exec pastor. Or if they were a CFO of a giant company, they should be. And I don't think I'm alone in this sin. I think I have some buddies, and I think some of them are on the call. We think, and here's how it went for me. I don't know how it is for others, but for me, the church builds its mission on saying, if you're broken, come here. If you're a mess, come here. If you need a turnaround, come here. And oftentimes that means all a pastor has to work with are really messed up people because they do show up that have no skill and are just in it for Jesus, which is awesome. And when they see someone who has corporate skill, who actually reads their Bible, they think this will be wonderful. It works about half the time. and it might be a little less than half the time. And I would say what I'm learning, you got to have the nickels and noses part of you got to know how to forecast. But
Sure.
what makes a great church CFO, technically strong accountant who might not be the right, I'm going to go the other way. What are the ones that make them be a right fit for ministry? Okay.
Yeah.
Demonstrated ability working within a volunteer organization.
Mm.
Like that. That is a
Working in a volunteer organization, not volunteering in a volunteer organization,
yeah.
working with volunteers when you cannot fire them. Okay. Like that's a big freaking deal. And
It is.
with squishy stuff that doesn't make sense with numbers. Ken, here's a real-time example of me
Yeah.
in a church and what the CFO had to decide for me. Okay. This is maybe beating up the point, but my predecessor at First Pres, wonderful, wonderful man of God, Vic Pence. He could light up a pulpit like nobody's business. And he had a donor in California who was lovely woman. I think she watched TV. That's how long ago this was. And she came here to visit a few times a year to see family. She was an incredible donor to the church, and she wanted to do a sculpture for the church. She was a big artist, and she knew this up and coming artist who was, I mean, a really big deal.
Yeah.
And I think the story goes, she asked my predecessor what he was preaching on. He said Genesis. And although that detail's a little hazy, but the end result was great. I'll commission him to do a Garden of Eden sculpture. How fabulous. It comes to the church. It was soft porn.
Oh my
Mm.
It
goodness.
was, I mean, Eve was a freaking babe and had no clothes on. And it's like, what? And it was about a $500,000 sculpture. What do you do with that? And
Yeah.
how do you create a policy for designated gifts
Yeah.
that like what accountant at the big three knows anything about that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and that is the real, I mean, you've got to have the accounting. You've got to know how to do cash
Sure.
in, cash out. You got to know all that. But there's this other layer of church that is, I mean, Jesus has the most fascinating taste in brides. It's
Mm.
just amazing. And the skill required to work with volunteers and in an organization that's fairly allergic to new ideas, it's way
Yeah.
more than what do you know about numbers? It's what do you know about
Sure.
people? And I think the delineation for me is often, have they been in a paid position with volunteers working for them? Uh,
No,
the
I
other
love that
the
way.
other the other piece that we could spend at least an hour on is the CFO candidate only works if they match the particular church you're sending them to. And if you're in a high growth, how do we start more locations, multi-site, man, we're growing. That's a very different thing than we've been stagnant for 30 years and our oldest donors are in their 80s and we don't know what's going to happen next.
Sure.
Mm.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with that, especially when it comes to that fit, not just culturally, but even spiritually, because especially you start thinking about it, how many different denominations there are across the country to think about there's over 300,000 places of worship. And so you start factoring that even in just the not-for-profit area, it's a niche in itself, let alone the faith-based sides, and then let alone even within that denominational and theological considerations. It makes it being that you have to be very specific about who may be in there because they could be not the right fit. And even just considering that, I just start thinking about this. There's a lot of times we've interacted with many, even substantially large churches, where they bring in a person that they thought would be a CFO, or they use that term CFO fairly loosely, and the person really does not have the criteria for that could serve as a really good CFO. And that's where even part of this, Jen, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. I'd love to get your thoughts on what you think about what William's considerations were. But what do you think are some things? Because I think a lot of times churches can tend to overestimate certain areas of saying, oh, this can easily overcompensate for any of their shortcomings. But what are some competencies you feel could be often underestimated by churches, especially when it comes to that CFO position?
Yeah, I think that I'm kind of on the opposite end of William here and talking about you can't ignore the technical competency of the accountant. I mean,
Sure.
it is very difficult, I think, for a pastor who doesn't have experience in any financial acumen to be able to assess whether the person is uh, financially competent. So you have to, other than what he was talking about, them coming out of a big firm or a big company. So the person has to have the actual competency to do cash flow, to be able to
Yeah.
forecast, to be able to handle an audit, to do those kinds of things. And I think that a church that is more of a small to mid-sized church that is starting to grow into that area doesn't necessarily have a person or a board that would be able to find that competency without some help, maybe, or
Sure.
just the right conversation. Go ahead.
And Jen, just to interject, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, so like my ruminations were on churches and don't just hire the business person, and it's usually larger in the normal
Yeah,
size church where maybe you don't even have a full-time finance person. I
right.
think it's this is going to sound chauvinistic, but it's the the stay-at-home parent who was an accountant before the kids came along, and we'll hire them, they'll be great, and there's not enough look at their competencies. Is that kind of part of what you're saying?
I feel like that. Or there's I before I worked at Church of God Ministries, I worked in a mega church, about 4,000 a weekend. That was what pulled me into ministry. And there I was the person, they created the role for me. And they didn't like the word chief. So especially as a woman, they didn't like the word chief anything. Nobody's a chief. So I was the director of finance. And that we had some male female distinctions in the particular, it's a non-denominational church but had a very conservative background, and so having a woman in leadership was a challenge. And I was hitting that ceiling really before I even got in there. I was at the ceiling, and I had kids at home and so forth. So it was, the hiring process was very unique and challenging because, for example, they talked to my husband to see if my husband was okay if I worked and things like that. And so, but I knew that walking into it, as my church that I had been in for 20 years. And I feel like the small to mid-sized church needed to find somebody who has that operational competency that can manage all of the finances, but you have to have a heart for ministry also, and be willing to be flexible, because even though I knew that women was a kind of women in ministry and there's no women pastors in that particular church. Of course, I work for Church of God Ministries now, which is all forward in women in ministry. So there's uniqueness and different theological perspectives. But I knew that walking in, and it was a weird nuance to kind of navigate as a person of excellence, for my CFO background. And so I think you have to have that operational competency, but the part that is most underestimated by churches when they hire is the flexibility and nuance to take that competency and not be a person. They have to be able to speak to non-financial people, and they have to be able to have a teacher's heart, because you want to teach those who are around you, to help them to understand financial information, maybe not as in financial terms, but so that they can understand and actually make good strategic decisions. And I wanted to be a partner. And I think you need to acquire a person on your staff that you want to partner with to bring the church and establish campuses, 4 campuses, or how many. I did 4 campuses when I was there. Again, that was something that we hadn't done, and we were growing to that level. So they knew they needed a CFO in-house to do that. So if your church is small to medium and you're starting to grow, you need a strong financial acumen candidate, but who has a passion for your strategy and where you want to go. And I think you have to take the time to find that person that makes the right fit and not be afraid that you can find them in 2 weeks. It needs to take some time.
Oh yeah. And I guess, from an administrative side, I'll just say we'll do the poll question, but I do want to add on this piece too as well. So we'll do the polling question, but I think, one of the things that I'll just add as we have folks talking about the polling question and submitting it, I think there has to be that healthy tension between strategic and technical. And a lot of times, this is where even part of it in a large church, you start thinking about it, the senior pastor is more of the visionary when we start considering this. The CFO, to an extent, has to be strategic, and the controller, finance director are more tactical and technical in nature. The whole hope here is to find that balance of a CFO that can blend both worlds as a bridge between the vision that the senior pastor and fellow leadership has in terms of the vision and mission of the church, while also factoring the realism that comes from, let's say, the business back office, the controller, as to here the bolts, nuts and bolts that we have to factor in, the numbers and everything, and bridge that together from this side of saying, how can I help support our leadership while also lead our team to make sure we can help on both ends? Because you need both sides. You need that side that's able to be the realistic side to say, I don't know if we're going to be able to meet that budget wise this year, but then we can consider how can we pivot then, and how can I do that in a way that also still honors the vision that's happening at our church. I think that's where we've seen a lot of great CFOs have, and that's where part of it is that competency that I think gets underestimated. Is a lot of times we see a CFO because, I think, William, you've seen this. A CFO gets brought into a church because they have 25 years of corporate CFO experience. And sure, it's great that they have that, but there are going to be certain things that don't fully translate even in a ministry setting too. And that's where I'm even just curious, how does the leadership role of a church CFO differ from a CFO in a for-profit? I think you've probably seen it too as well. I've seen it myself, but would love to see what you think are some key differences between that two ways.
Great question. And I think the question churches that are attending should ask is, are we big enough to need a CFO? Because it's a very different thing than accounts receivable, accounts payable, and that sort of deal, right? But assuming you're looking for a CFO, I process verbally, so forgive if it's a little messy through here. But I think the biggest hurdle I've seen with corporate CFOs moving over to the church is, this is a generalization. Please don't take offense if you're a CFO. Most CFOs are wired with a default answer of no. So,
Jen, do you agree? Do you say no?
I do. I say no a lot, but
okay.
when I say no,
let me finish though. Let me finish. If it's a church that's big enough to really need a CFO, okay, and that's an honest question to ask at this webinar, if nothing else. If you're really at the part where you need a CFO that does forecasting, that does, the stuff that the AP and AR is not going to be able to do, then you do not need someone pre-wired to say no, because the church is about achieving the impossible. We're always chasing windmills. We're always going after the lost. What you want to go after one? We got 99 sheep right here. What do you want to spend money going after one for? Right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's the CFO question in a church. So I look for CFO candidates. What really makes them stand out, if it's a church that's big enough that needs a CFO, is, are they wired to say not just yes, pastor, but yes, pastor, and if we do this, let me tell you what the ripples are that happen to other parts of the budget. So a default setting of solution, but a realism of saying, this is what happens if we really do this. It's kind of like my accountants. I've had several over the years. I love my accountant. And I told her when I hired her, okay, rule number one, I look terrible in orange jumpsuits. Rule number one. Okay. So rule number two, I want to pay as little tax as I have to. And the rules have to be in that order. So,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so like a CFO who can get past the orange jumpsuit part, which is actually a real thing with churches, but
Yes.
if they can get past the compliance part to the how do we make this happen, and then what would happen afterward, that is a needle in a haystack. And I'd be willing to suffer waiting on them to learn some other competencies if they have that foundational difference from most CFOs. So Jen probably is never going to talk to me again because I've just labeled the whole industry. But that's a little piece of my take, having been the visionary and needed a CFO. The very best one I've ever had here was always, I'll find a way toward yes, and I'll tell you what that means, and then you can decide if you really want to do it.
Yes, my no's tend to be no because, or
Yeah, that's it. That's right.
I mean, I've had to train myself to say no because,
Yeah.
or maybe if. And those are how I have had to work through. And then the if part, I have to be very creative with in staying in compliance. And the maybe ifs are usually really hard and very challenging. And sometimes I just don't want to be that difficult, but that's where I enjoy the most watching, because the maybe ifs really expand the ministry. It gets us into a different place that you wouldn't normally go if you were just being transactional and just doing everything by the book in compliance. So
and you guys should listen to Jen more than me. Well, you should. I'm not an accountant, and I'm talking about creative accounting. We tried creative accounting in Houston. It was called Enron, and
Oh, yes.
everyone's in jail. So, like, yes, be the no person if you have to. But man, if I'm looking at candidates and they're like, well, I could figure out a way that works. Now we'd have to fire 4 people to get it done. Okay, well, that's a good answer. That helps me,
See where
Yep.
the drive is. Yeah. And I think this is where, even just considering as we keep going into this next set of our slides, especially finding that right candidate fit, I think, Jen, some of the things that you've learned, and William, some of the things that you observed are coming from people that didn't, get this trait overnight, but it took time, right? And it's like, especially a lot of times, Jen, I think for me, I was the controller of a large mission agency for a number of years. And a lot of times I would only just say, no, we can't do it. No, no. But then you have to start realizing there's more to that than just the numbers piece. There's a relational side that you have to, from a leadership side, that's important to really help elevate you for other opportunities. And that's where I think even that CFO piece is so crucial, because just like what you were saying there, Jen, you've had to change the way you've approached even the conversation piece. And William, when you observe people, you see how their interaction is, because it's so important to see, is this a good relational fit? Because if not, you're going to end up being, I mean, it's not just all of our reputations are at stake, but you're just seeing the relational side that happens long term between a senior pastor, an executive pastor, and their CFO, if it's not a good fit. And that's where I was just curious, especially and maybe I'll start off with William and then get you, Jen, because on this piece, you have been a strong candidate for a lot of CFO candidacies. William, when you're assessing like a CFO candidate, like a person that truly understands stewardship, generosity, and the ministry, what are some of the things that you're really looking at as a part of this person? Because again, you can see a resume all day in and day out. You can have that hour phone call, but I'm sure there's other things that you have probably seen that says, okay, this really sticks out. Like this person genuinely understands. What are some of the things that you've seen that are some good traits from that?
Well, if I were interviewing you, Ken, I'd probably say something like, Ken, one of the coolest parts about working in finance for churches is people are giving money. They're benevolent. You're not having to sell a product. You're not having to do a Black Friday sale. You're not having to like that's
Yep.
not part of your world, right? And it's such a fun world. So tell me, Ken, if you think through your charitable giving history, tell me a couple of the things you were happiest about giving to.
Mm. Oh, that's a good one. And I guess I would
It's
have to
super
think through.
disarming. The question I want to ask you is, show me your giving receipts at your local church. And I don't
Right.
know that you can ask that in an interview without running into some problems. So I'm trying to find a workaround to that, but they will not understand generosity if they're not generous.
Yeah,
I served Presbyterian churches. I'd say the vast majority of those have in their bylaws that the CFO may not be a member of the church. It's like a protect interests kind of thing, you know. And they don't have to be bought into my vision, but they better be giving their money to God somewhere.
sure.
And so I'm trying to find questions to positively ask. Tell me about your gift. When was it most fun for you to give money away? You see what I mean?
That's a good one. Yeah, and it's something that, for me, it took me a minute just to pause and think about all the different ways of just considering how to answer that, right? Because a lot of times it's just more so, oh, well, I just give my tithe to the church, right? But that doesn't have that same deeper meaning as opposed to being able to have given that this opportunity which changed lives. This is one of the things that's really been a big, I do like that. Sorry.
Mhm.
How about you, Jen? What are some of the things you think about that on that piece?
Um, well, I think that if I think that William obviously has some experience in asking the question, because and when you're asking questions for interviews, because the type of questions that I was getting in different places is, tell me about a time that you have been a good steward, or give us, are you a good steward of, do you think you'll be a good steward of our finances, or something like that. Anybody can answer yes. Obviously, I'm a trustworthy person. I do my accounting, and I'm gonna I can do that. Plus, I'm trying to get the job, right? So even if I'm not attempting to be dishonest, I'm trying to be truthful. I don't know whether I'm a good steward or not. I'm doing
Yeah.
the best I can. So the questions that William might be able to provide would be great, more nuanced questions like that. Um, and I think that when I was making some of my notes before this, we were talking, I think that a person can be transactional and relational. And transactional tends to be your typical accounting brain, and we're very transactional people. And your perfect candidate has to be transactional, but also has to be relational. Can't be all relational, but has to be relational. And it is very difficult to mix those two things. I tend to be much more transactional because it's black and white and I know I'm following the
Sure.
rules, but that's how I'm wired. But I've been working for years on how to be more relational and how to not be so direct. I'm a very direct person, very black and white. So if you ask me a question, I will sometimes warn you and say, well, I'm going to give you my very direct answer.
Yeah.
and they have, most of the people who work with me have figured out that that's my personality. So you have to, in the interview process and in the interview questions and scenarios that you're talking about, they really have to be well thought out ahead of time, not just put together, go on to Google and ask the 10 questions you should ask the next CFO, because that is not enough to figure out if the personality and the person is going to be there. I also think there's a great time for transition in when you're starting from a medium to larger church, that um, you did not pay me to say this, Ken, but there might need to be a fractional CFO that would start you into determining whether you need that full-time CFO as part of your congregation. I The Presbyterians, you can't be a member. The church that I worked in, the mega church, I had to be
You
a
have to
member.
be a member.
So
Yeah.
there's all kinds of nuances to that. So whatever your background is, your denomination background, there's all kinds of different nuances that you have to work through in asking these kinds of questions and assessing if the person is the right one. I think I went off on a tangent there. I don't know if I answered your question, Ken, but you
No,
can
I
thank me
think
later for saying that you should have a fractional CFO to start.
yeah.
Well, I'll butt in on your tangent before Ken pulls us back to task. I think you're absolutely right, Jen. My friend Dave Ramsey, we've done a lot of work for him over the years, and anybody in finance knows who he is. I've had the hardest time finding a finance director. We've been through, and I think the problem is me. We're a little adolescent in size. We don't need a CFO. Dave told me I didn't hire a CFO till I had 200 employees. I had controllers, I had finance directors, but I didn't need the level of forecasting in a full-time six-figure job that until we got to 200 employees. Now, he's a little strident, maybe. He would like that label, but maybe it's not that big, but 365,000 or so Protestant churches in the U.S., maybe 2,000 of them have 2,000 in worship on a Sunday. And even then, I don't know that you need a full CFO for a 2,000 in church on a Sunday kind of deal. So maybe I'm wrecking the whole webinar with Jen's rabbit trail, but we have a fractional controller right now. We don't even have fractional CFO. We have APAR and a fractional controller that does some forecasting and makes sure that all the books are done right. Closes out things for us on a monthly and quarterly basis. That worked great for us, but it probably doesn't. I don't know. Every church has to figure it out, but the pure CFO function, to me, tends to be larger churches. I don't know, Ken. You may never invite me back now. Sorry.
I'll be sure to invite you back and also invite you to another game of golf. Now, actually, that kind of goes into our polling question. I'm going to be curious about the results because the next polling question talks about the size of the church for those that are attending right now. Because I think it is good for us just to be even candid about that. There's a lot of times where churches may say, we need a CFO, and yet even the size constraints of what the current circumstances are for that church, they truly don't. And I think they would appreciate us being able to talk about why they wouldn't or why they should consider other options like a fractional CFO, because that's where part of it is they feel like something's missing. And they feel like the only way they could get it is just through bringing in a full-on CFO. When really, at the end of the day, it may be getting a better understanding of what are the specific pain points, and is there a way that doesn't require the full commitment of a full CFO too? And this is where we've seen it even for other large organizations that struggle with finding a CFO is that cultural fit. I think Jen, you were just talking about how the Presbyterians, they don't want you to be a member of it if you are a CFO. The one that I'm with, they required at a specific level and above to be a part of that denomination, to be an active church member of that, and also an active giver to that. This is where part of it is to say you can check those boxes, but there are also going to be additional things, especially on the cultural side, that need to be playing a role in this. And I think even for a CFO, the candidate fit, I've seen, I know the second question here talks about examples. I'd love to hear y'all's examples too of this. For me, there are times that, especially when I've served in that fractional CFO for a while, we've been willing to help vet some of the CFO candidates that were coming in. And I've noticed that for those, especially in a church setting, if they don't have some traits of servant leadership, where there is at least a level of humility, even though they may know the answers, we realize that there are times that may in itself, if they think they do know all the answers, we can see that could easily lead down to a road of potential conflict, especially when it comes to interactions with leadership and also their team. And I'm saying this from a real life example that there was a large client of ours that I had served for over a year as their fractional CFO. They brought in someone. I interviewed them. I gave my reservations saying this person seems to check all the boxes from the technical side. They understand the overall basis of what this field is within the faith-based world. But I do have some senses that there's going to be a level of a potential conflict in the future because of how their attitude is less of showing some level of humility, but more so, I know it and you're wrong. Fast forward 3 years later, I'm back there. I'm back at the client again, helping repair some of the damage that happened relationally because of what has happened there. And so even now, as they're going through that next process, it's so important that I think they've seen it. It's important to have some of the relational attributes of humility, some of those things that could be beyond just the technical that they learned from college or from their experiences at a large organization. I don't know. What are your thoughts, William, based on some of the things that you've interviewed, some of those things where you're like, oh, this person, it really is a bad fit, even though he may or she may have fit all the boxes from an overall candidate fit.
Well, there are not many things that God says he hates, but he does hate the proud.
Mhm.
So, and he's real clear on that. And he's taught me that enough times that I shouldn't keep getting in trouble with it, but I do. So, but he really doesn't like that. So humility, absolutely, right? Ted Turner died yesterday. My
Yeah.
very favorite Ted Turner quote, if I had a little more humility, I'd be perfect. Uh,
Love that.
so good. But beyond that, I think Ken, it's much more nuanced than that. I have
Sure.
been in sales my whole life, and I sold newspapers as a boy. I sold, let's call it eternal fire insurance from the pulpit. Like I've always been, whatever you want to call it, it's always sales,
Yeah.
right? And the church is the most nuanced customer I have ever run into, ever.
Mhm.
And we work with, I mean, when I train our new people, we're growing and hiring. Hey, we've worked with 5,000 churches and this many denominations. And let me just tell you something, after doing this all these years, if you've seen one church, you've seen about one church.
Yeah.
And cultural fit is everything. I mean, what we do when we do a search, we tell people this is an organ transplant, right?
Mhm.
And the real difference maker between a good and an excellent transplant doc is not the surgery. It's not even
Sure.
finding a donor. It's doing the tissue match.
Mhm.
You
Yes.
put a healthy kidney in a healthy body, and if they don't match, it's just bad everywhere.
It's
And
bad.
so you've got to, as Jen rightly pointed out, they've got to have the competency, right? They've got to have the volunteer skill, which we've talked about, but they really have to fit the fabric of that particular individual church. For instance, some of our clients are think about how a church is run and how decisions are made, and is it an honor culture or not? Like, there are some very vibrant, wonderful churches where pastor is the benevolent dictator, and that
Sure.
works for that framework. If you're a CFO and you're walking into that, you better think twice before you say no, pastor. You better find a new way to say that. Okay. If you walk into a Presbyterian church, why in the world are you talking to the pastor about finances? That's for the finance committee. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
that's just the way.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
it just depends. If you go to Resurrection in Kansas City, Adam's church, you're not talking to Adam. You're talking to so like it
Yeah.
it's so much more than size and budget revenue. It's culture, it's how decisions get made, it's what honor do we ascribe to different levels of things. It's who actually makes finance decisions in this church
Yeah.
and how do we manage that. So it's everything, but it's not here are the 7 steps to, you know, figuring out whether they're fit. If I could give one piece of advice about cultural fit that is the most common mistake I've ever seen is people don't write down their own cultural values to know what works and what doesn't. And that's a
I
whole
like
nother
that.
webinar on building a cultural code and that sort of thing. But tissue match is everything. The problem is most people don't know how to articulate what that tissue match is. And so we get
Right.
left with figuring it out, which we're happy to do. But it's a
Yeah.
lot easier if people will take the time to figure out what is our tissue so you can assess an outsider before you, or an insider before you hire them.
I love that. And even as you start getting to this next one, right, that process and decision framework of like you're talking about that gut feeling, and this is where, William, you're talking about that tissue match. It's essentially like you start to get very quickly as you start interacting with whether or not they are a right tissue match. I'm curious, Jen, and I know I'd love to get your thoughts on what William talked about there, because again, you were from the part that you got hired. You weren't the one that was searching out, but you were the one that got hired. What are your thoughts in terms of what William said there? But then even just start thinking about it to, especially when it comes to being a CFO, what are some of the things that you had to build structurally in your own development to be that right fit for that tissue match too, that William was looking for his client as well. So what are your thoughts on that, Jen?
I think from the candidate perspective, I'm going to stop and say I absolutely love the tissue match. That is exactly how it felt. I needed to become part of the inner workings and be a tissue match. And so thank you for that. I will use that example in my future and try and remember to give you credit, sir. But
Don't worry about it.
as the CFO candidate, there's a unique spot, and I don't want to go down this rabbit trail too far. There's a unique spot of being a lady, a woman who has to have confidence and be confident in your what you do and your expertise versus being proud. And so I'm still trying to figure that out in my life. I'm very confident in my capabilities, but I don't want to be too proud in that. But if I don't exude that confidence, then I kind of get walked on a lot. And maybe that isn't a gender thing. It's just my perspective as a lady. But that is something. And as a candidate that is walking into a CFO world, when you're in the for-profit business, you've got to be really strong and very confident and really borderline over the top proud. But in the church and nonprofit environment, that really needs to be tempered in order to be in the right fit, and in order to even determine if you can fit into this place. It's a very challenging,
Delicate balance, isn't it?
It's a really hard balance, and still trying to figure that out. Thankfully, I don't need to go find a job anytime soon, so I'm happy for that.
Yeah.
But I wrote down a couple notes about finding the best way to find a CFO, and Will would know this much more than I. But a person, when I was trying to create questions to find a controller or someone on my staff, I did a lot of assessment for the ministry to be. You can't just ask them, "Do you love ministry? Do you love our goals?" It's really hard to evaluate. You have to figure out how they would handle tension or how they treat people in that different scenario. So a lot of my questions were scenario based. How do they balance being truth and grace? I find myself having to give a lot more grace in ministry that I generally am not prone to, and feel like that's a really hard thing. I would not do that as a normal, logical, individual accountant, but that we want to do that in ministry, to be very graceful for that. And so that's a tension that I wrestle with in my job and would wrestle with as a candidate that's coming forward. How can they translate stewardship into leadership? And when you're a CFO in the nonprofit or in the profit world, for-profit world, and you come in, you think you have to manage your own expectations, and you have to figure out what their expectations are of you, because pastors, I'm generalizing, of course, but pastors and ministry people don't tend to understand what a CFO thinks they should do, and be the strategy partner and be one of the decision makers. That is what a CFO is striving to do. And CFOs aren't pastors. So
Yeah.
if your church is driven by the pastors and a pastor, senior pastor that runs the roost, the CFO is probably longing to be their right-hand decision-making partner. And sometimes that's not there, but neither of you know to ask or to assess that on the front
Right.
end. You know, as a CFO, you're thinking, well, obviously they should know that I'm a CFO level, so I'm here to make strategy and help make decisions. And the pastor's going, I need a solid person who can do the accounting and keep us afloat, but I'm not going to right hand them on every decision that we make together. So
Mhm.
so you have to assess that in the culture of your individual church and in your individual environment. And then let's see. So there was a lot of fear on my side coming out of
Corporate.
profit into nonprofit.
Yeah.
And the only thing that set that aside was prayer. I felt called into ministry. That was not my goal. And so when you have a CFO candidate, the number one most important thing, and I know this sounds trite to some people, but is covering the entire thing with prayer, taking the time and making sure that the candidate prays through that and feels called to that role, and the church feels that they are the right person and prays over them. Without the connection of prayer and God being in the decision, it's not worth even walking down the path. So I don't mean that to sound tripe and phony, but that was it. It is by far the most important thing in assessing whether this candidate is the right person.
Well, I think even just to add this, and I know we'll pull up the next polling question while we talk about this, is just like what you're just saying there, Jen, was like there's many times that a church, ultimately, if they are not leaning into not just prayer and truly vetting it, there could be some ways to regret the decision here. I'm curious, William, on this. One of the things I've told a lot of our church clients and all when they were looking for CFOs and even for other positions is I've said that we don't look for the best available or the most available. We look for the best possible. And sometimes the best candidate may be a person that wasn't actively looking for a position, but just happened to be that they were the best fit. And then we just happen to reach out. I know it's a lot of times the churches are like, well, that person we probably won't even know. So we'll just go with this person, this next second person, because they were most available. They had the willingness to move and all that. But then later on, they regret it. I'm curious, William, have you seen that? I know that's kind of a little underhanded toss to you, but are there certain things that you've seen during these types of processes where you feel like, hey, the church should really just consider this before they potentially get into a series of regret for hiring this person?
Well, the biggest regret is hiring the wrong person.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Firing in church is hard.
it is.
Almost impossible.
Almost
Really,
impossible. Yeah.
really hard. And what it says in the church, addition is easier than subtraction. I again, it gets back to, do you know your cultural values? Do you know what you're trying to get out of this? Do you know what you're trying to solve? Or are you just enamored with a resume? And I think churches that are big enough to need a CFO, often the pastor particularly, sorry, pastor, I'm picking on you, you think a resume is worth more than it is. You want to know one place I've totally failed in hiring for my own company, Ken? Here,
Where's
let's
that?
just get real. This is like bonus material. Don't put this on the social medias, okay?
I will not.
I have never once had a successful run at hiring someone who's only worked in large corporations. Never. And I keep getting enamored with them. We have, other than New York, Houston has more Fortune 500 headquarters than any city in the country.
Sure.
So, we have all these great resumes floating around town. And I hired a guy who had been with a very successful tech firm in their finance department, Fortune 50 company. And he totally failed at our job because he had been pigeonholed in one little area in a very large corporation. And most of the accounting work that we have done is very similar to churches. It needs more Swiss Army knife.
Yep.
And so I think that if you, pastor, are looking at some great corporate finance person, you need to ask if they're actually able to get in the weeds and be with, I think the largest budget you listed on your polling was 5 million or above. That's a big budget for a church. It's a very small budget for a CFO to oversee.
Yeah.
And so will they actually be able to help people with their pay stub, which is like, that's a real thing in church. Like, why does it say this? CFOs be like, talk to my secretary. And, like, does that make sense?
It does.
I know it from my own failures here, and I see it in churches all the time. We think that you get the person from the bigger company will work when you need someone who knows guerrilla warfare.
Sure.
Yep.
Well,
and
I
not
think
afraid to jump in. Yeah, you can't be afraid to jump in.
exactly. And that's where,
and of course the easiest solutions to hire a good search firm, but whatever.
Well, I think, William and Jen, I think you all have seen this very clearly too. And I know we're trying to land the plane with one more polling question on this, so I'll just have that pop up. But this is where a lot of times, I don't know, you probably have seen this at a church. They're like, oh, we're just going to bring in this person because they do have that experience. They've been a CPA and they've been in corporate for 25 years, or oh, we don't need to bring in another lawyer because we have someone on the board who's practicing law and has been a lawyer for 25 years, but it's completely different types of law. Same for different types of accounting. And a lot of times it's just the church feels to an extent that that's the best route for them, when really it could cause more hurt than actually being a benefit for them. And so that's where I was just curious, William, on this piece, especially when it came to that. You said, hey, those that have been purely in corporate, they have not had a high degree of success in serving in a church or a faith-based organization. Where have you seen churches most effectively find candidates, outside of traditional job postings?
Well, the number one place people look is within the church, which I'm a fan of.
Sure.
Back to the tissue match. If you really needed a new kidney, who would you go to first?
Mm-hmm. Your family.
Yeah. Your family.
Exactly. And I would say half of the searches we do, we're given a list of internal candidates from the beginning. And it's like, so pastors look for the easy button. For here. This is going to sound off topic, but listen to this if you don't listen to anything else I say. If you make the right hire with a CFO, okay? If you make the right hire with a CFO, listen, you are not hiring a cost center. You're hiring a profit center. Pastors don't think that way, but the reason we don't like fooling with finance is it doesn't generate any growth or any money or anything. Sure. It just tells us what we can't do. And we don't like that. We want to grow. If you do the right job with a CFO, it will save and grow your money rather than be just a cost center. So let that liberate you from pressing the easy button and hiring the retired accountant from your church. First church I served, I was the associate pastor. We were only 500 people. I got assigned the staff liaison to the finance committee. It was a committee-driven church. We had 12 members. They were all CPAs. I was 25 years old. I thought, this is amazing. I'm going to learn so much. You know what I learned? If you get 12 accountants in the same room, you're going to get 15 different answers about how to solve something. So the I have skill in finance. Yes, it has to be there. Please, please, please listen to Jen when she says that. But it is the tip of an iceberg. And the much bigger part is, can they jump in? Do they know guerrilla warfare? Do they know? And so if you're looking from within, it's awfully easy to think this is just a cost center. Let's just hire the retired person here. Go. They might be the right person, but boy, for a serious hire where it could be a cost, not a cost center, but a profit center, I would take the time to weigh anybody in-house against the very best outside the house.
Love that.
Ken, did you get to the last polling question launched? I know we have to get that, but let me finish here.
I think we did, but yeah, Jen, I would love some of your last thoughts.
Yes. So my Um, I'm going to say that when I was hired out of industry and into ministry, I thought they were crazy. I did not think I was the right candidate. Um, and as a matter of fact, I took another industry job at the same time and said, I'm not the right fit for you at the church. And God really pulled me in. I was only at the other industry job for less than 30 days before I was back to saying, okay, God is just pulling on my heart. This is where I'm supposed to be. So I did not think, and frankly, I wasn't the right candidate at that time, except that God said so. And it has taken me, I've been in ministry now 15 years. I am growing every day. So the candidate that you want to hire is a person who's willing to grow and change and work on themselves and be willing to hear and grow, be willing to hear criticism. And I have a long, long way to go, but there is so much that you can learn from your peers and from the pastors. I am not a theologian, but boy, have I learned a lot about theology, and that's fun. Um, I've learned about crazy words of what's a Calvinist and what's a Wesleyan holiness and all these different things, being a CFO. And so you have to find a person who wants to grow and expand and be willing to do that. And you can definitely attract them. Our last question is, how can you get them to come? I took a 50% pay cut when I came out of industry. Okay, 50%. And why was I willing to do that? Because that's what Jesus wanted. And I have a lot of flexibility. I have a lot of PTO, and I get to work from my home most of the time. And they let me do my little side hustles, like talk here and get to be involved with different places. So my career is still all fulfilling to me because of the flexibility and the amount that I can do. But I'm working on people's payroll as soon as I hang up because I'm willing to do all the small things too. So that, not that you want to hire me, but if you hire someone who's willing with all of those things, then I think you'll find a good candidate that the Lord will have for your particular position.
Love it, Jen. That willingness to learn and humility definitely plays a big role, even in the leadership position. So, well, I appreciate you all, Jen and William, so much for your time and the level of expertise you've had in this capacity. It's been a blessing just to be able to have this hour with you. Just like you said, Jen, we definitely need more than an hour, but I hope for those that are listening, especially for those that are in that time of looking for an opportunity for a CFO or finding one, that this gave you as some pointers. So appreciate you all staying on here, and look forward to hopefully some future episodes.
This is not a CPA firm. Assurance, attest, and audit services provided by Cape & Krause, LLC. Carr, Riggs & Ingram, and CRI are the brand names under which Carr, Riggs & Ingram, LLC, CRI Advisors, LLC, and Cape & Krause, LLC, and CRI Cape & Krause Advisors, LLC provide professional services. CRI CPA, Cape & Krause CPA, CRI Advisors, Cape & Krause Advisors, Carr, Riggs & Ingram Capital, LLC, and their respective subsidiaries operate as an alternative practice structure in accordance with the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct and applicable law, regulations, and professional standards. CRI CPA and Cape & Krause CPA are licensed independent certified public accounting firms that separately provide attest services, as well as additional ancillary services to their clients. CRI CPA and Cape & Krause CPA are independently owned CPA firms that provide attestation services separate from one another. CRI Advisors and Cape & Krause Advisors provide tax and business consulting services to its clients. CRI Advisors and its subsidiaries, including Cape & Krause Advisors, are not licensed CPA firms and will not provide any attest services. The entities falling under the Carr, Riggs & Ingram, or CRI brand are independently owned and are not responsible or liable for the services and/or products provided, or engaged to be provided by any other entity under the Carr, Riggs & Ingram, or CRI brand. Our use of the term CRI, we, our, us, and terms of similar import To note, the alternative practice structure conducted by CRI CPA, Cape and Krause CPA, Cape and Krause Advisors, and CRI Advisors as appropriate.